is Jessi, will be introduced by Mimosa.
We'll be introduced or reintroduced if you've listened to the roundtable this morning. So Jessi's with Ripple Neuro. She has a PhD in biomedical engineering from Pitt and has worked about for 3 years, first through the animal electrophysiology arm, and now is a sales director for the new line of invasive research products. So I'll let you go ahead.
Awesome. Let me just get this slideshow going. Are you guys able to see my screen? Awesome. So yeah, thank you guys so much. Again, as everybody has said, the talks have been incredible. I've been trying to get work done in the background, but it just hasn't been happening because I've been so focused on the talks. So yeah, as I kind of mentioned briefly in the roundtable, Ripple has really been splitting itself kind of in the last year. So this will be my only salesy slide. But yeah, so now we actually have 2 lines. Ripple Neuro is our animal line, and then Ripple Neuromed is our line of fully non-invasive and invasive products for human electrophysiology. But kind of, I'll start by telling you guys a little bit about me, not that I haven't already started doing that. So when I started, actually, I went to Washington University to be pre-med. And that first year, I've always wanted to help people, and my dad's a doctor, and that was kind of really the path that I was going. But when I read this article in 2009, I believe, I think it came out in 2008, from Todd Kuiken's lab in Scientific American, which I know is not a scientific journal, but this was really my first insight into the world of neuroprosthetics. And from that moment, I really kind of changed my career pathway. And so instead of kind of going into implementing kind of solutions, when you look at the neuroprosthetic space, especially at that time, there really weren't any clinical solutions that were available on the market for people to have complex control of a neuroprosthetic device. So I became an engineer and then went to graduate school where I worked under Aaron Batista doing brain-computer interfaces, specifically with the idea of translating that technology to the neuroprosthetic world. It's funny that Flip was talking earlier today because just hearing his talk reminded me how close he was to scooping us on the CST project, which is because I also worked with non-visual feedback and doing kind of artificial feedback for providing animals with a sense of where their limb was in space. But so after that, I really got interested in Ripple because Ripple was working on building cutting edge technology that would go to researchers who are doing cutting edge work and work that could eventually be translated. So at Ripple, we have the vision of a world where health and well-being are commonplace. And so this is really important for us just in terms of how we got started. We started with the prosthetics, the Revolutionizing Prosthetics project. So the mission here to get that vision accomplished is to develop game-changing neurotechnology to advance human health and well-being. And in the neuroscience or in the neuroprosthetic space, this really means designing implantable devices. So when I started in 2017, we were about halfway through the haptics project, which was really our kind of first coming out into this clinical space and developing clinical prosthetics. So here we actually have our 512 channel processor. So this is important. A lot of people who have actually been giving talks this week actually use this processor. And the idea here, and something that everyone has mentioned, is the importance of having sensory feedback in addition to motor control for usable, workable prosthetic. So here is kind of what we had envisioned for the haptics project, which was a 32 channel myoelectric sensing prosthetic, which would take signals from the remaining limb, or if you were, we talked about Oscar a little bit on, I think, the nerve day, and Oscar Asman, and so stuff like that also, where you kind of take those neurons or nerves and put them back into the muscle, so then you can have our electrodes in the muscle that's being innervated directly by certain nerves. And then we also here have a stimulating implant, which would then have a cuff that went around, or you can either use a fine. There are lots of different technologies that can go to this that would connect and go into the nerve. So you would then stimulate based on the controls that were coming through the Nomad. So to kind of go into this in a little bit more detail, this is our Mira implant. So we're actually going through clinical trials and writing the IDEs for clinical trials on this right now. Again, working at University of Pittsburgh. So this is our device. And so you have all of these little prongs so that it can stay within the muscle. And here's a video actually of a dog who has one implanted in his back hind limb. And you can see that as he stands still here, you stop having that modulation pattern, whereas you get very clear walking pattern here. So this just shows kind of the first good laboratory practices test that we did, which is really the first step before you can even think about implanting into a clinical trial. We also have recently just received funding from both the NIH and from DARPA to work on our sensory prosthetics specifically for phantom limb pain. So here, and also this is really great, just the talks again have been fantastic, but kind of with Francesco's talk this morning about Sensar, we'd have a kind of sensing foot on the bottom of this prosthetic, which would then communicate the pressure to a sensor and a sensor processor here, which would then use an algorithm to transmit stimulation controls to our fully implantable, and then that would stimulate the electrode on the nerve. So this is kind of what we're working on now and going through in the science space for that. So this is just to bring up, this is one of our companies that we've kind of broken out, which is our neuroprosthetic company. So as we've heard, there's a lot of work that goes into translating from science to actual implantable medical devices with FDA clearance. So SYNC is really responsible for getting all the documentation done, the FDA clearances, and then also the clinical trials through. So we've also talked a lot about the neuroprosthetic implementation pathway. So essentially here, as we said, you have your basic science and then you have your clinical device. So that pathway has a lot of different steps to it. You have the science, which there are a lot of tools like from Ripple or TDT or BlackRock. There are a lot of tools that kind of service that science side. And that's really understanding the mechanism. And then there's the translation side of it, where you have to kind of understand how do you want to embody this into a therapy. So now you know that the brain has neurons that are encoding direction, but what does that really mean in terms of taking those directional neurons, those cosine tunings, and turning that into a working BCI? Then you have the device development side, which a lot of people I think underestimate how much work goes into that. So if you want a wireless product, how are you going to get the data through the skin? How are you going to communicate? Is RF going to be something that causes a problem in hospitals? So these are a lot of things that go into this that the research side doesn't always consider. And then finally, you have the clinical therapies. And the clinical therapies are really what, for instance, Abbott is working on, where there are people who have Parkinson's or they have pain, and you want a device that you can then have funded or reimbursed through a hospital so that people can get this as a clinical treatment. So first I'm gonna, in the next little bit, Ripple is really focused on servicing all parts of this pipeline. So not just providing the scientists or not just providing the clinical therapies through our SYNC company, but instead really servicing everyone. So as we were going through building our Mira device, we kind of realized we have now become experts in this near field IR wireless device. And I'm not going to go into too much detail about these just due to time. I want to talk more about the vision. And so if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. My email is on the last slide. But yeah, so we essentially took what we had done for the Mira, which had gone through several different kinds of chemical characterizations, biocompatibility tests, all of that, and have now moved it into a cheaper epoxy version for the research world. And in this, researchers can really customize what they want to do with their implantable research. So for instance, in the corner, let me see if I can get my laser. Here we go. You'd actually be able to connect your own electrodes to these pins and then push them in and seal this with epoxy. So this is really great for communicating EMG, which, as any of you guys who have done primate research with EMG know, running those leads up to the head cap can be absolutely nightmarish and lead to some really bad outcomes. So this really provides researchers with an opportunity to kind of put those monkeys back in the cage and not worry about them pulling their own leads out. But we also have a lot of applications for this in sheep EEG. And so this is really a product that we're excited to get off the ground. And this is also, again, on the motor side. So we also have taken our research devices into the sensory side of things, because again, really important, people are doing research on both sides of this. And so here, this is our recording and sensing implantable prosthetic. So this will be around 96 channels of fully enclosed. So you can see here how it would fit on the head. So the idea is to be able to fit 2 of them at the same time. But we really, it's still in development, and this is something that we really just want to be able to leverage all the work we've done on our human implantables. So this essentially would be taking the technology from what we've been funded by HEAL for and using that for the animal world. And so then finally, the part of the pipeline I think is the least addressed by the companies or by current technology is this translation and device development part. So we have a lot of people who are doing science, and then we have a lot of companies that are building end stage medical devices, going through VCs, getting funding, and just starting right off the ground. But what Ripple really wants to do is also include these people who are in the translation and device development stage. So we've actually, another one of our companies that we've broken into is this Iris Biomedical. And here what this does is leverage all the wireless tools that we've developed to work with other companies who have done the science, they know the mechanism, and they know where they want to go. For instance, let's say it's someone who has migraine pain. They know that they need to stimulate a certain area of the brain, and they know what electrodes they want to use. They can come to us and be like, do you have technology that can help us package our design? And so we do a lot of engineering services for these people and have done some really great work to date with people who are doing BCI implantables and are really kind of kicking off this business to do some really great things. So thank you guys so much. That's kind of the vision within the 10 minutes that I have, so I'll take some questions. But this is just something I also wanted to point out just about the work that we're all doing. And so this is actually from Mark Hamill. I don't know if you guys are Star Wars nerds like I am, but he just makes a comment here that the thing that's really made the biggest impact on him is watching someone say that the Luke arm provided them with the ability to like feel their hand again. And that's something that I really just wanted to put here to kind of show the work we're all doing is really changing people's lives. So yeah, thank you guys so much. And if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Jessi. So I will take the question coming from the question and answer tab and try to elaborate on that, which is about like actually what is the actual apparatus that you're using to do closed loop stimulation.
Great, that's a great question. So the Nomad is really, I wish I had one with me. It's about the size of my water bottle. And so the Nomad is able to actually take signals from our front ends. So our front ends are either the implantables, or we also have percutaneous versions of all of them. And so that would then send the signal into our processor, which has its own processor. It's essentially a computer. And that then you can actually take your algorithms and put them onto that processor itself, so that it's reading data in and sending stim commands with very, very low latency. We're currently working on getting our, like one of the projects we're actively working on is our code on the box, getting it sub-millisecond latency. And that's something, Marco, I know you know we've been working on for a bit, but yeah, so that's one of the things that's really, we have active engineers working on that now, so.
Excellent. And actually, I mean, now this is out of absolute personal interest, but what do you think in terms of delivering a device for the actual human final use are the characteristic of a closed loop device that you cannot miss if you want to actually produce something that will impact the life of people?
And so that's really interesting. So that's one of the questions that, and this I also think comes up to what Flip and everyone has been saying, that you have to really manage time, priorities, and things like that. In terms of a prosthetic device for the clinical market, you don't need sub-millisecond latency. You need sub-millisecond latency when you're doing things like spike timing dependent plasticity. So for that, having us create, we don't need to spend as much time on software for that aspect. So one of the things, I'll actually bring up my slides again. You guys will get to see all your pretty faces. Okay, here we are. So in this picture, you can see that the Nomad is really what's controlling this. But for the clinical case, we really will take all that. There will be an FPGA that's actually on the sensor itself, because we don't want someone who is walking with their prosthetic or being able to use this to run or go on a bike like Stanny showed us earlier in this week. You want to be able to have something that's contained and well contained. So the idea here for the clinical market and being able to do those closed loop things, you don't need the same kind of latencies. You do need to understand, like if you're doing biomimetic stimulation, you'll need to do some testing and design your algorithm that would have to probably be personalized to the individual. But other than that, I think that's kind of where I'm at on my question. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Okay. So I think I'll thank you for your presentation and the awesome work that you guys have been doing. And it's been a pleasure to collaborate with Ripple to design the summer school. I will